When I ask people, what are you expecting from disclosure? What we find is that for many people, it means the official acknowledgement of our relationship to intelligence from beyond this world. In other words, they want to see an acknowledgement, not just on BBC and CNN, but they want to see it from the Kremlin. They want to see it from the White House. The first really official acknowledgement was in the year 2013, and this was at the National Press Club. It was called the Citizen Hearings on UFO Disclosure. 7 corporations own all the major media in the West. There are things in our skies that we don't know what they are, but don't worry, because we'll protect you. So the military is taking a stance, at least publicly, that looking at this as a threat. Today, we're going to talk to you about disclosure. Specifically, I want to talk to you about the ongoing disclosure of information regarding our relationship to technology from beyond this world, to life from beyond this world, and to contact from that life with us in the past and present. And I have to be specific when I talk about disclosure. I was recently at an event. There was a question that came up from the audience. I was on stage and someone asked me to speak about disclosure, and someone else, and a woman in another part of the office, she said, well, disclosure of what? And was not aware of the efforts that are ongoing right now through the mass media to condition the population of the world to accept the revelations that are now being made in one form or another of our relationship to intelligence from beyond this world. It's a complex topic. It's not new. It's been going on for a long time. And this is one of the interesting things about disclosure. When I ask people, what are you expecting from disclosure? What we find is that for many people, it means the official acknowledgement of our relationship to intelligence from beyond this world. In other words, they want to see an acknowledgement, not just on BBC and CNN, but they want to see it from the Kremlin. They want to see it from the White House. I don't know that that's going to happen in that way. Disclosure itself has been happening for a long time on many different levels. And just depends on what it is that you're expecting to see, what you believe in terms of what you're being shown, because obviously there's a narrative around the disclosure, not just the fact that disclosure is happening, but how the narrative is being driven. So these are things I want to talk to you about today. What is disclosure? What does it mean? What are the implications? What's the big deal? I've had young people come up to me at some of our events and say, what is the big deal? You know, we all know that we're not alone in the universe. So let me just kind of break this down a little bit. First of all, this will probably be part one of at least a 2-part series, because there's so many facets of disclosure. And I think many of you know that for over 40 years of my adult life, I have been blessed to lead people into some of the most isolated and remote and pristine and magnificent and beautiful places remaining in the world today for the archaeological sites that we find there. But also because of the indigenous people that preserve the wisdom that we find in those archaeological sites. So I'll be clear, I have not been with every indigenous tradition, everywhere on the planet. Every indigenous tradition that I have ever been with allows for a relationship between them, their people, their communities, and a greater family in the cosmos, what they call their space family, their space brothers and sisters, or whatever. And it's more than just a reference to them. There's an interaction that happens, especially when I go into the Andes of southern Peru. Spend a lot of time leading groups into the Tibetan plateau, the 12 monasteries and 2 nunneries over 26 days, and the Tibetan people, among others. And the point is that they all allow for these relationships between us and a greater intelligence, an ongoing relationship that began a long time ago. It's only in the West where we, in the past, may have had a problem. And I say in the past because I believe that we are in the process of being conditioned. We have been since I was a kid of accepting on a deeper level our relationship to intelligence from beyond this world. If you're old enough to remember, I mean, some of the first science fiction programs that came out in the late 50s and early 60s, on black and white television, and some of the first Star Treks that came out, and Lost in Space, with an AI intelligent robot that used to wave his arms around and say, "Danger, Will Robinson, danger, Will Robinson," and we laugh about those, but those were early efforts to begin conditioning the general population to think differently about ourselves and our relationship with the world. And so you say, well, why would we need to think differently? Well, I'm going to begin with that. It all comes down to, there were a couple of studies that were done. They were done back in the early 1960s, and then they were published later in the 60s, about what it would mean to us. How would it impact society and civilization to know that we're not all that there is, that the world doesn't revolve around us, that there's something else out there. And a couple of these think tanks, they did some really interesting research. One of them is the RAND Corporation. I know some of you are familiar with them. Another one is the Brookings Institute. The RAND Corporation, these are private organizations. And I'm looking over here. I don't have a formal PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to reference some notes for accuracy, and I want to give you some direct quotes. I wanted to put this out quickly so that we could build on this because of some of the things that are happening in the news cycles that are coming around over the next few days, next couple of weeks. I wanted you to have a little bit of a context from my perspective, because you've asked for that. So these are private think tanks, private corporations that consult with the authorities, with U.S. military, with governments all over the world. And the RAND Corporation was interesting because when they were asked about their positions, they denied that they had done any work or any reference or any acknowledgement of intelligence from beyond our world. And finally, through enough asking, I think it's through Freedom of Information could have played a role in this, they acknowledged an internal memo. It was dated November 27, 1968, where they developed a memo, and it was broken down into a number of different parts. Part 5 is actually called UFOs, How to Proceed and Why. So it shows us the RAND Corporation was looking into this, and they gave all kinds of scenarios about what could happen, and if these things happened, what it would mean. It was kind of like a fault tree. If this, then that. If this, then that. So I'm just sharing this because it goes to show they were being asked to explore this and to think about it. I think the really important one, and probably the one that had the greatest impact, was from the Brookings Institute. This is from 1962, and I'm going to read directly from this. I want to get this right. And what they were doing, the Brookings Institute, was taking case histories from anthropological studies here on Earth. What did it mean to societies that had been cut off from the rest of the world? So these are tribes that were, and again, this is back in the 60s. And these were new tribes that were being found in primarily in South America and Africa, or in the Pacific, on islands that had been cut off from the rest of the world. And by being cut off, this is the important thing, that they were absolutely certain of their place in the world and of their place in the cosmos. They had they were very entrenched in an idea of who they were and where they were with relation to the rest of the cosmos. Now, we're not cut off from one another, but as a society, this applies to us. We have been conditioned to be very certain, very human-centric about who we are and our relationship to the world. Now, there have always been people, and maybe in your family and certainly in my family, we've always acknowledged that, the universe is a big place. And as Carl Sagan said, it would be a terrible waste of space if we're all that there is, and we know that they're not. As a scientist, I have studied the archaeological, the anthropological evidence, the fossil records. I'm going to begin talking about those in some of the other programs. So I've always been very open to the idea, and for me, it wasn't a problem. It's never been a problem for me. But let me share with you why it was a problem, according to people at the Brookings Institute, and how this thinking led to the hiding of information that was coming out in the 20th century. So here's a direct quote from the Brookings Institute. It says, anthropological files contain many examples of societies that were sure of their place in the universe. So this is what I was just mentioning, which have disintegrated when they have had to associate with previously unfamiliar societies espousing different ideas and different life ways, others that survived such an experience. So some of them disintegrated. They ceased to exist as a society. Those that did continue their societies, those that survived such an experience usually did so by paying a very high price of changes in values and attitudes and behaviors. So this is the official thinking back in the 1960s when it comes to the public revelation of what was happening with crash sites, with recoveries, not just in the United States, but these were happening all over the world. Recently, we're finding as far back as 1933, a vehicle, an extraterrestrial vehicle, had crashed in Italy during the rule of Mussolini and was given to the U.S. because of our relationship with them at the time and the technical expertise. In the cultural traditions of all those places that I mentioned previously, from the Andes Mountains into the Tibetans, they've always had records, written records, oral traditions, and in some cases have actually harbored the occupants of the vehicles that have crashed or landed on Earth among the indigenous populations, and they have learned from them and communicated with them over a period of many years and developed their cosmology based upon those relationships. So I'm going to talk about that more in another video. What I want to talk to you about right now is the disclosure itself, the way it's happening, how it's being presented to us, and what it may mean, and what the concerns are about that. So there is a process. It's a concerted process that is becoming a little bit more apparent, certainly in the news cycles recently. And I say recently because as far back, some of you remember, I mean, for me, the first really high level official disclosure, there were always rumors and there were whistleblowers and there were leaks, all through from World War II and development of nuclear weapons, up into the present. That's always been happening. The first really official acknowledgement was in the year 2013, and this was at the National Press Club. It was called the Citizen Hearings on UFO Disclosure. Stephen Greer, many of you know who Stephen Greer is. I interviewed with him for a film that he did last year. Interestingly, he and his staff felt that my part of the interview did not fit into the film, so it wasn't included. But I interviewed with him. They came to me here in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I'm saying this because I had the opportunity to spend an evening with Stephen Greer and talk to him. Very interesting guy, very interesting perspectives. He was the one that was driving this National Press Club, largely driving the National Press Club that happened in 2013. So what happened there? Well, it was just that. National Press Club, representatives from many different publications came to hear the testimony under oath of retired military, of engineers, of scientists, from around the world who had the experiences and seen the evidence. And during the time, and again, it was a different time, World War II, mid-20th century, the Cold War was happening, and many of them were under non-disclosure agreements. So they had signed documents saying you can't talk about this stuff. Having worked in the defense industry during the Cold War, I know exactly what this is. All of our jobs were very compartmentalized. In other words, I was working on software and I had no idea what my software was being used for. We would receive code, my team, we would receive a section of software, of code. We didn't know what had happened prior to that, and we didn't know where our code was going to go. Our job was to take the input and make that input perform in a certain way for output, and then it went to another team in another isolated compartment. They were called vaults, and they literally were vaults. So very compartmentalized, and that's how you keep secrets. And it works actually very well. And so a lot of the people that were testifying had been in compartmentalized projects where they had either seen directly or they had heard from other people that were working with them, on these projects, on the military bases and things like that. So that was 2013. And, it just kind of fell where it fell. The national media really didn't pick it up. You didn't hear much about it on mainstream, legacy, cable network news, or if you did, it was poked fun at. There were jokes. Late night TV, Little Green Men, all the jokes that just trying to discount the whole thing and shed doubt on the credibility of what was happening here. Things kicked into high gear in 2021, September of 21. The Department of Defense, DoD, released actual footage. Now we're moving from the point of just speaking about it. Now we're actually seeing something, although still no physical data other than the visual. So it's more than oral testimony. So the DoD released the footage of it was a UAP. They changed it from UFO, and now it's been renamed to UAP, Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon. And that was September of 21. And then there was a period of time where the dust kind of settled from that. It was assimilated. It was whatever it was. Now we go into high gear. April of 23, the Pentagon now is releasing additional footage of 2 UAPs, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. That's April of this year. Now, May, the next month, May 18th, Gary Nolan, Stanford scientist, comes out and he states in mainstream media, confirms that non-humans have visited the Earth. Now, our indigenous ancestors have always said that, but this is someone that is believed to be credible in the academic world, in the scientific world, is saying this, and it is being picked up on mainstream media. You are seeing this across the legacy media. Okay, that's May 18th. June 3rd, Newsweek comes out. Okay, now it gets official. If it's on the cover of a magazine, it's official, okay? Newsweek comes out and says an intel officer, Christopher Mellon, has stated that these things are happening and that reverse engineering, so he's saying reverse engineering has happened. What does that mean? Reverse engineering is when we have a technology and we tear it apart to figure out how it works so that we can recreate that technology. That's the reverse engineering. You tear it down and you have to understand all the components. And if those components are based on technologies that aren't known yet, it can take years to understand how those components are working. So you are going from a finished product backward to understand the nature of the mechanism. Now you can recreate this. So what Mellon is saying is that reverse engineering has happened, he's saying, and it should be made public. And the reason for this, and this is one of the implications, is because presumably the technology that we find in vehicles that come from another world, that world, whether it's from another world in this solar system, so local, or beyond this solar system, it's going to take a long time to get here. And they're not using internal combustion engines. These aren't 8-cylinder V8s. They're not rocket engines, liquid fuel, solid fuel rocket engines. These are working on a physics that the mainstream academia are not teaching. On the one hand, on the other hand, it is a physics that has been known and is taught to selected people who are chosen to work on selected projects. I remember when I was in the industry, during defense industry, during Cold War, I know they would recruit people who excelled in mathematics at universities, high-end universities. And if they did really well in conventional math, then they'd be recruited to work for governmental agencies. And there is another math that they would be privileged to learn and then to apply that math in technologies that aren't commonly acknowledged. So that's what's happening with Newsweek, June 3rd. And then the really big one that everyone, let's just put this on the map, everybody's talking about this now, June 6th in 2023, David Grush. He was a very credible intel officer, had a lot of security clearances, he was a former military, U.S. Air Force, I believe, a lot of credibility, went on mainstream through testimony under oath, congressional testimony, that the U.S. is two things. In possession, first, has a secret crash recovery program, number one. Number two, is in possession of non-human aircraft or non-human craft. And number three, in possession of non-human bodies, biological recovery. So this is kind of where things are right now. And you can see that it's not spontaneous. This is a directed rollout. Some people are calling this a soft disclosure, rather than boom, just coming out one day and saying, we interrupt this program, for a special, like they do in the movies, for a special report. And you see, the Kremlin in Moscow and the president in the White House and leaders all over the world simultaneously making this announcement. That hasn't happened. And I don't know, again, that it will, because that would be a hard disclosure. This is soft disclosure, where it's coming out I believe, for a couple of reasons, soft disclosure. One, I think it is testing the public to see how the public responds to this. And number two, there appear to be different camps that have different visions and different agendas regarding disclosure, if it should happen at all. There's some that still don't want it to happen. Younger people are now coming into those jobs and those careers that have kept a lot of this secret, and older ones who signed those non-disclosures, including some of the former astronauts who signed the non-disclosures saying, we can't talk about what we experienced on the lunar surface. We can't talk about what happened when we were at the space station. Pilots say, we can't talk about what happened on our reconnaissance missions. All of them believing that those non-disclosures were temporary. That surely, the astronauts, and I've had the opportunity to tour and to speak with and to know some of the former astronauts, and they all felt, it was the Cold War years. It was a different time, so disclosures were okay. Surely, by the end of their lifetimes, something this big would be made known because of the implications. It wasn't. And so now they are dying. They're on their deathbeds and they don't want to take the secret to the grave. So some of them in their, last days or last hours of life are revealing, what it is that this happened. Can you imagine? Can you imagine having a direct experience that could change forever the lives of every man, woman, and child on the face of the earth? Having that as a military man or a woman, so you're under oath and you're on your mission, and being forbidden from sharing something like this when you see the world in the condition that the world is in right now, and how this information could help the world and change the world in truly beautiful ways. Emotionally, what would that mean? And there are all kinds of stories. I had the opportunity from a conference. At one time, I was leaving a conference going back to the airport, and I was sharing a van with a lot of women, and I didn't know who those women were. And it was a long drive from the city where the conference was back to the airport. And so we started talking, and they were astronauts' wives. And apparently there was something called the Astronauts' Wives Club, where they come together and console and comfort and support one another in difficult missions. And they were sharing among themselves what they had seen their husbands go through emotionally and psychologically, because most of them were not trained. This is a part of the training the military doesn't do a lot of. Emotionally, what do you do with that kind of information? And sadly, there are stories, and we've all heard this. This isn't a secret. It's very public. Many of them turn to drugs and alcohol to help desensitize them from the emotional pain and the mental pain and the psychological pain of not being able to share these extraordinary experiences, even with, they weren't supposed to share them with anyone, even with their spouses. So I had the opportunity to hear some of those stories. So the disclosure, we're in it. It's happening, and it has been happening. It's just happening on a little bit different level now. So I want to talk about a couple of different implications. Let me begin with the technological implication. We often hear about, although there are records of our interaction, the archaeological, anthropological, cultural records of our interaction with intelligence from beyond this world that go back thousands of years, it wasn't happening in the technological society that we have right now. So when we have those interactions in a technological society, it means something different. It means that we can up-level our technology. And that's exactly what began to happen. If you remember, back in the if you're old enough to remember back in the 50s and 60s, many of you know, I'm just giving an example, I'm a musician. And when I'm not doing what I'm doing now. And I remember my guitar amplifier in the late 1950s and early 1960s, when I'd put that amplifier on a stage and it was dark, behind that amp was lit up with this soft violet glow from the vacuum tubes that were called, and some of you musicians will know this, they're called 6L6 power vacuum tubes in the back of the amplifiers, in the head of, for example, a big Silvertone amplifier or something like that, because we were still living in the age where everything was running on vacuum tubes. Young people have never seen, young people today, I've been in audiences, they have no idea what a vacuum tube is. They've never seen them because we live in a world of miniaturized components and printed circuits. And those are the result of reverse engineering in the 1950s and 60s that was happening from technology that was coming to this world. It either crashed or been brought down or landed intentionally, but was kept secret, kept under wraps. And it's really interesting how quickly we made that leap from vacuum tubes and the mysteries of life, and all of a sudden we had insights into DNA, all of a sudden we had insights into miniaturized technology, microcircuits, transistors, resistors, capacitors, without the vulnerability of those vacuum tubes. And this is one of the implications. So one of the concerns, people say, well, what would it mean if we had that disclosure? There's the technological implication. The moment that we have this disclosure, that we have technology from other intelligence, other civilizations, either other planets or other star systems, more likely. And it's not based on the burning of something to release the energy. All of our energy is based on, we burn something that has captured sunlight. Either it's coal or it's wood or it's the fossil fuels or whatever it is. But we have to destroy something to capture the energy to drive whatever it is we're going to be driving. Turbines for electricity, or automobiles, or whatever it is. Presumably the technology that has brought an intelligent form of life from another star system, it's not going to be based on that. It's going to be based upon fundamental principles of physics, drawing energy from the very foundation of the field that underlies all existence, something called the Planck field, named after Max Planck, the physicist, the early 20th century. And this is no secret. Again, we know this, and physicists work with this. Tiny fluctuations on the quantum level that can be captured, and those fluctuations, those movements, can be harnessed and amplified into meaningful forms of energy. The moment we do that, we no longer, think about what that means. We no longer need a fossil fuel. We don't need nuclear power. We don't need natural gas. We don't need gasoline in the tanks of our cars. We don't need to burn wood. We no longer need power lines to carry energy across our society, across our communities, our nations, our planet, under the oceans. Communication changes, industries will change, and for some people, that change is frightening. And it's frightening because they're looking at it from a perspective of loss. And that is one perspective based in fear. There are other perspectives. Yes, it would change the industry. It would open the door to new industries, new technologies. So what that would mean, for example, everyone would have a device sitting in your home somewhere, in a closet somewhere. And that device would be powering everything in your home with no wires, not plugged into the wall. It doesn't need to be renewed because it's drawing on the Planck vacuum, the infinite supply of energy that we have available to us today. The same with an automobile. Automobiles would have a little gadget, they're about this big, the ones, the prototypes that I've seen, that would sit in, somewhere in the trunk of the car or under the hood or wherever it is. There would be no fuel. You would still need fossil fuels for the other 6,000 applications in our daily lives that are based upon fossil fuels. We simply would no longer be burning it. So if we're really concerned about climate change, for those that really believe that CO2 is driving the climate change, even though the science, the peer-reviewed science doesn't support that, may be contributing, it's not the cause. And we can say that because the climate change would be here even if humans were not here. We can see that in the geologic record. And if you believe that humans are the cause of that CO2, which also isn't supported by the science, I talk about this in the other videos, but if you really believe those things, I would think you would want this energy. You would want the disclosure to reveal this kind of energy. But ultimately, in a world where we are seeing the effort to remake the world, the Great Reset, to consolidate power, to centralize power of energy and electricity, to centralize finances, to centralize government, to centralize food production, a source of energy like this would do just the opposite. It would free us from the bonds and the shackles of the fear and the control of those who want to have power over the masses. And it would free humankind for the first time, I think, in 5,000 years of recorded human history, making energy available to every man, woman, and child that wants it. There are indigenous communities that don't want energy. I've visited with them and I respect that, but those that want it. And it would unleash innovation and imagination and creativity to begin building a world that we all know is possible in our hearts. We would see that in our lives. And that is one of the implications, one of the beautiful implications. Stephen Greer has released a film recently called The Lost Century, saying we could have had these possibilities between 70 and 100 years ago, because that's how long we've had the technology. So when this disclosure happens, this is one of the implications, the technological implications. Another implication is social implication, and this is what the Brookings Institute was talking about. What does it mean to society when we think, man, we're it, and all of a sudden we find out we're maybe a little it in the presence of a much bigger it? What does that mean? Well, interestingly, the Catholic Church has had to come to terms with this, and I have a statement from them. Very interesting. The Jesuits, I think many of you know, are the scientific arm of the Catholic Church. The Jesuits had a conference and released a paper. What would the existence of intelligent extraterrestrials, would it be consistent with Catholic belief? I think the question is funny. Are you going to have an unintelligent extraterrestrial? I mean, if they're here from somewhere else, they're obviously very intelligent. Our civilization, you think about this, civilization, we're told, began about 5,000 years ago. That's this cycle of civilization. Technology science is only about 300 years old. Who or whatever it is that's coming to visit us presumably has been around much, much longer. Look at what we've accomplished in 300 years and then take that to the level. What would it mean if you, for 1,000 years, which is nothing, or 5,000 or 10,000 years of a civilization in terms of AI, artificial intelligence, holographic projections, longevity, healing, I mean, all those things. So with the Catholic Church, their official stance, I'm going to read this to you directly. It says, the discovery of life on other worlds would not at all be inconsistent with Catholic belief, since it reflects the ability of the Creator to establish creatures wherever and whenever He wishes. So they're saying that they're not saying it's out there, they're saying if we find it, it's not a problem for Catholic tradition, because the Creator, one Creator, can create life anywhere. There are some other religious institutions now that believe that beings are coming to our world to be saved from whatever tradition they have, because our religion and the religion that these people have been indoctrinated into leads them to believe that this is the only place that where that can happen. So it's really interesting. You see some of the social implications that are happening here. So socially, what would that mean? And I think it would mean that the superpowers that have called themselves superpowers in the past are maybe not as super as they would like themselves to believe. It's interesting because most of the disclosure is coming through military channels. And my concern regarding that is that the military has viewed the craft that they cannot account for. Some of the craft in the footage are ours. We have reverse engineered them. We're flying them. Our pilots know how to fly them. I personally have seen one of these I've seen more than one, but I've seen one up very close in northern New Mexico. And absolutely certain it was ours. Didn't make a sound, didn't move fast, just, very, really, really interesting. This was back in the late 90s. So the concern is that from a military perspective, what's happening in the news is we're being told there are things in our skies that we don't know what they are, but don't worry, because we'll protect you. So the military is taking a stance, at least publicly, that looking at this as a threat. Honestly, my perspective is if you've come from a civilization, either a star system away or even planets away, and you've got the power to be here, you've got the technology, if you were ever going to hurt the people of the earth, it could have happened anytime, over the last 200,000 years. That's how long we've been here. I don't think they're coming to hurt us. That's my perspective. Now, there's indications that our ancestors tell us there are multiple intelligences, and some of them are more benevolent than others. Some of them, it's not that they're mean, it is that they are very goal oriented. And if their goal is, to find a planet to live on, then it may be that if there's anything standing between them and that goal, they have the means to remedy that. So I think we're looking at more, and again, as a scientist, I'm sharing it with you from the scientific perspective. My personal feeling, my personal understanding from dealing with indigenous people is we are dealing with multiple intelligences from other worlds, because Earth is a really interesting place for a lot of reasons. And one of those is because of our biology. And that leads me to the third implication, the biological implication. We have bodies. Native Americans here in northern New Mexico have found living survivors, and they lived with them according to their reports. I did not meet them personally, but according to their reports, and they lived with them and they learned from them. And while they are biologically not human, as we would call human, they are DNA based. And through our DNA, we have to have a common ancestor. There's a common ancestry that's seeded DNA in this cosmos. And so there is a relationship, maybe a distant cousin, but they have two arms, they have two legs, they have two eyes. They apparently from the autopsies, their internal organs function a bit differently, but they do have lungs, they do breathe oxygen. So even though they're not us exactly, we are similar enough that we have a common ancestor somewhere a long time ago. And there's a whole story that we can go into behind that. So what does that mean? If they have been around for hundreds of years, what does that mean to the implications for healing and the implications for longevity? And those have implications in industries that exist today, the medical industry, the pharmaceutical industry, and all of these things. So we're seeing, we're living in this time where we're seeing pushback from the old guard. We're seeing young people that want to embrace the new information. This is happening in politics. I remember I live in the state of New Mexico again. Our governor, Bill Richardson, was a governor from what years? From 2003 to 2011, Bill Richardson. And one of the things that he did when he became governor is the story goes, he didn't tell me this personally, but the story is that his wife asked him to look into this and see if there was any truth to what had happened in Roswell, New Mexico. It's our state here. Back in the mid-1940s, and he ran up against a brick wall. He could not find, he wasn't given access to that information. Some of our former presidents wanted to come forward with it, and things happened in their administrations that sidetracked them from being able to do that. So the point is that we are living a time now where the technology that we have will be deeply influenced by disclosure. That was not the case 300 years ago, or maybe even 100 years ago per se. Not the way it is right now. And our society will be deeply influenced by disclosure in terms of the consolidation of power, the centralization of control levied by fear. Because I think what will happen is when the disclosure happens at the level that we suspect this is going, that we're going to think of ourselves differently. One of two things will happen. We either have to deny that we are part of a greater community, and then you don't have to deal with it. So there's an old saying, denial is a big river in Egypt. And there's some people that will do that. Some people will be so locked into their either religious or spiritual doctrine that they will resist the implications. A lot of people, I think, will be open to the implications. And the power structures that are alive and well and bustling in our world today, that are all jockeying for power. You can see this happening. They're jockeying for the best position as the world goes into the great shift, the great reset. Geologically, there are things happening now and in our near future. Climatologically, things are happening now and in our near future that are very different from what we've lived in the past. And there's a jockeying for positions of power and control, and disclosure is going to be a part of that. And I think it's up to us. It's up to us in terms of how we accept it in our lives. So I am going to invite you to do your own due diligence. Look into this, but look into it from beyond the mainstream media, because that is the narrative that's being directed. Okay, there's a narrative out there. 7 corporations own all the major media in the West, including Sky News, BBC, PBS, NPR, Fox, MSNBC, CNN, MSN. I mean, all of it, as different as they look to us on the outside, there is a common thread. And when a narrative is driven, you will hear the words and the language identical throughout all of these. And this is happening with disclosure. So I'm going to invite you to go beyond. I mean, it's interesting to watch it, certainly. And there's some good independent sources that you can see in social media, kinds of media. I'm going to invite you to go into your heart, because there is a neural network of about 40,000 sensory neurites in every human heart, discovered in 1991. And although we've been conditioned away from using this reliably in the modern world, this was a foundation for our ancestors. It's a foundation for indigenous traditions all over the world. It's a foundation for deep intuition. It is a foundation for the coherence between the heart and the brain that gives us access to our own biology so that we can self-regulate our immune system and our longevity enzymes and super memory and super learning and super cognition and resilience to change, and all of that begins in the heart. And I've talked about in all the other videos. I don't want to be redundant here. I'm going to invite you to go into your heart when you hear what it is that's happening. And I think this is going to be really important, because if we are given a reason to fear our relationship to intelligence beyond our world, if we're given that reason, the question is, it's our choice in terms of how we respond to that fear. And ultimately, I think this is what disclosure is going to do with each of us. It's going to drive us to come to terms with who we are in this world, who we are in the cosmos, who we are spiritually, and what a deeper relationship with intelligence from beyond our lives can mean to us. And we're all going to have different answers to that. But the way we answer that individually is going to determine collectively how we move forward with what is now being called disclosure. So in part 2, I want to talk more about our indigenous relationship with intelligence from beyond this world, my direct experience with indigenous people who actively communicate and receive healings from what they call their star family on a regular basis, and what we see in the archaeological record, what we see new discoveries in the archaeological record, what we see in the anthropological record, what we see in the DNA record. So I'll do that in a separate video in the interest of time. For now, hope this helps a little bit, maybe to put some context into what's happening in disclosure. It's not happening in a vacuum. It's happening within the context of all the things we're talking about, the Great Reset and the climate shifts and everything else that's going on. And so I think we have to look at it from that perspective. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation as much as I'm enjoying thinking of you as I'm looking into the camera and having it with you right now. Let me know in the comments how you feel about this. Thank you for your love and support. Stay tuned. I look forward to our next.